challenging things to do at when you're leading a Seder, especially when you're leading a Seder for for people of all different backgrounds. And you want to make sure that what you're saying is being received and being understood and appreciated. When it comes to opening the door for Elijah the prophet after the benching, and in our tradition, what we do is if it's not Shabbat, we take two candles with us. Because on Yom Tif on holidays, you're allowed to carry the candles. You can't light them from new flames, but you could carry them. And we go to the door, we open the door for Elijah the prophet, and we say the welcoming. So it's sometimes, if we're a little self-conscious, as we're saying, we're greeting Elijah the prophet, and of course, more often than not, at least I've never experienced it, where you see Elijah the prophet actually walk in, and we have a glass of wine prepared for him. And as we know, Elijah the prophet's going to be the one to announce the final redemption. So we are awaiting the redemption. But it's a difficult thing to explain, especially because it's a little spiritual. So we're going to learn all about where this custom came from for welcoming Elijah the prophet, and why it's so important, and why it might actually reflect our generation now, in our own situation more than it did for our ancestors and for the sages of the old time, but it might actually be more meaningful and more important for us today than before. So let's get right into it. Let's start from the basic mitzvah. One thing that's very important to remember, that on the night of Passover, which is Saturday night this year, so both Seders, Saturday night and Sunday night, but the first Seder specifically, there's a mitzvah to drink 4 cups of wine or grape juice, and everyone has to do it. There's no exceptions. You have to finish the entire cup. The cup has to be at least 2.9 ounces. So it's not very big. If you get the right size cup, a 3-ounce cup, you have to drink all 4. 4 cups of wine or 4 cups of grape juice. This is a mitzvah, and this is very important. Why do we do this? There are many reasons, but the most accepted reason is because Hashem told Moshe in the portion of Eira in the book of Exodus that I will, Heitzesi, I will take you out of Egypt. V'hitzalti, I will redeem you. V'ga'alti, and I will save you. V'lakachti, and I will take you to be a nation. So that's 4 terms of redemption. And for each term of redemption, we're thanking God with a glass of wine. And making the blessing before we drink it by bringing godliness into the material of the 4 cups of wine. This is one of the few crucial things that we do at the Seder, as well as eating the matzah, as well as telling the story of Passover and eating the maror. So the halacha in Jewish law, everybody has to do this. Even if somebody is not of means, we have to make sure that they have the 4 cups of wine. So now, without getting too much into the specifics, I'm not going to read this text, but this basically breaks down in the Haggadah when you drink each cup of wine. And it's hinted over here, according to Rabbi Tarfon, let's read the last paragraph, that there's actually a 5th cup. That there's a 5th cup of wine. And as we know in our Seders today, in pretty much the entire Jewish community, we pour a 5th cup of wine, although we don't drink it. We pour 1 cup, not for everyone, but just 1 cup for the whole Seder. And that's the cup that we call Elijah's cup. So take a look over here, because the first few paragraphs are talking about when you drink the 4 cups of wine throughout the Seder. The last paragraph here says, the sages taught in the Brisa that over the 5th cup, one completes the Hallel and recites the great Hallel. There's actually a 5th cup, and this is the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon. Now, if you look at the Code of Jewish Law, let's go straight to it. Code of Jewish Law makes it very clear that the halacha, in other words, the Talmud could quote many sources or many different opinions, but the Code of Jewish Law is sort of simplifying what the actual accepted halacha is, what the Jewish law is. And the law is that we drink 4 cups of wine. You're allowed to drink as much wine as you want during the meal part of the Seder, which is between the 2nd and 3rd cup. But once you finish the 4th cup, you're not allowed to drink any more wine, because you cannot add to the 4 cups. The mitzvah is to drink 4 cups. And once you make the blessing on the 4th cup, the only thing you could drink is water. You're not allowed to drink wine. So if that's the case, how does Rabbi Tarfon say that there's a 5th cup? Now, let's break it down simply into our Seder framework. Most of you, if not all of you, know exactly how the Seder works. That we have the 4 cups, and we pour the 5th cup. Now, the 5th cup is the cup that we call Elijah's cup. But if we all have to drink the 4 cups, as we know, on Shabbat, when the person makes Kiddush and everyone answers Amen and has a little bit, that's not what we do at the Seder. Everybody has to drink the 4 cups of wine. So if the custom or tradition is to pour a fifth cup, why don't we all pour a fifth cup? We don't not to drink, but let's all pour a fifth cup. Why is there only 1 cup? That's the question we're here to answer, because there is a fifth cup, but it's not just that we don't drink it, it's just that we have one at the table. So let us understand, what does this fifth cup represent. I'm not going to get into the technicals um, of the disagreements between the different opinions and how it came about, because some say the fifth cup is not referring to Elijah's cup, and some say it is. The bottom line is, in today's the accepted tradition is that the fifth cup is Elijah's cup, or at least that's what we call it. And how did we get its how did it get its name? So we're going to talk now about Elijah the prophet himself, why he's so important and so special, and why the Seder is so revolving around this Elijah the prophet. So I want to introduce a concept in Talmud that is called Teiku. Very often, but it happens a lot in the Talmud, where there's many different opinions and back and forth. As we know, the Talmud is not just giving us the Jewish law, it's giving us the entire discussion behind it and all the different variables of what possibilities there are and the different opinions and the back and forth and the I'll bring proof from this and I'll bring proof from that. And it's very often the Talmud will come to a conclusion. This is the law and that's it. And that's what we have in the Code of Jewish Law, is taken briefly and summarized for us very nicely and cleanly in the Code of Jewish Law. However, there are some times where there's no end. The Talmud does not have an answer. And the Talmud uses a term, to conclude the conversation if there's no answer, and the term is called Teiku. Now, Teiku, let's see if we have it here. Teiku is an acronym. And even though the Talmud doesn't present it as an acronym, but we were taught that the word Teiku refers to Tishbi, which is Elijah the prophet's name, Elijah Eliyahu Tishbi. Yitaretz will answer Kushis V'Abayis, is going to answer these questions and these disputes. In other words, Elijah the prophet, with the coming of Mashiach, will answer these questions. So let's get into a practical discussion about why is Elijah the prophet not Mashiach? Every time we talk about Elijah the prophet, we're talking about the coming of Mashiach, because Elijah is going to blow the shofar. We know this from Malachi. 1 second. Let's go. We'll come back to this in a second. I want to go to the source in Malachi, where it says, "Behold, I am sending to you Elijah the prophet before the day that Hashem comes, before the day that Mashiach comes." And it says that Elijah the prophet, the Medrash explains that Elijah the prophet will be the one to blow the shofar, announcing the arrival of the redemption. According to most opinions, it will be the day before the redemption, and Elijah the prophet will be the one to announce it. Elijah the prophet will be coming to resolve all the disputes. Elijah the prophet will be coming to bring unite everyone and bring everyone together and bring peace to the world. So Elijah the prophet is really the symbol of the coming of Mashiach, as we have this text from Malachi. So why in Jewish tradition do we have Elijah the prophet as one individual who, he lived during the time of the kings of Israel and went up in a fiery chariot? And then we have the actual Mashiach, which is the descendant of the house of David, that is going to be the resurrecting of the kingdom of David, and is going to rebuild the temple. So what's our actual belief in the coming of Mashiach, and how does it relate to Elijah the prophet? In what areas does it relate to Mashiach himself? So let's start from the Geulah. This is the Vilna Gaon, a quote from the Vilna Gaon, and he explains like this: "The following is why it's customary to pour a fifth cup, which we'll call Elijah's cup. There's a Talmudic dispute as to whether we ought to drink a fifth cup at the Seder, and the final ruling was never issued. So Elijah will resolve the question when he arrives. Why? Because there's doubt about this matter, and we pour a fifth cup but do not drink it. We call it Elijah's cup because there's unresolved differences, unresolved explanations that are needed, and therefore when he comes, he's going to resolve it." Now, this is a very pragmatic, or very I don't want to say cold way to look at it, but it is. It's basically, we have a dispute of what to do, and we need Elijah the prophet to come solve the problem for us. And because Elijah is the one that the Talmud says is going to solve all these problems or disputes or questions about, Jewish law, so he's going to solve this one too. So we pour the cup for him to come, figure it out. So let's dive deeper into Elijah the prophet himself. And we read this verse from Malachi, but let's go into some of the spiritual mentions of Elijah's role. So we have in the portion of the Chukosai, which we're going to read in several weeks, where it's the first Tochacha. It's the first time, where God really reprimands the Jewish people and also warns them about the consequences of, if we sin, here's what's going to happen. But at the end of all the predictions, the verse says, "V'zacharti es brisi Yaakov," I'm going to remember my covenant with Jacob. Now, if you look here in the Hebrew on the screen, the word Yaakov is really a four-letter word. It's Yud, Ayin, Kuf, Beis. But there is a Vav that is added to the word Yaakov in the Torah. So let's take a look now back at Malachi. Look at how Eliyahu Hanavi is spelled. If you look in the Hebrew, it says Eliyah. It doesn't. Now, there's commentaries that say it's because, Hashem's name is the Yud and the Hey, so that's the end off that Eliyahu is going to bring godliness into the world. It is going to reveal godliness, through coming of Mashiach. But his name is missing a Vav. So what's going on over here? So the Shalah says, sorry, I skipped. So I'm sorry, this is Rashi. So Rashi says the name Yaakov is written in full with a Vav in 5 places, and the name is Eliyahu was written defectively without a Vav in 5 places as well. And this is one of those. Yaakov took the letter Vav from the name of Eliyahu as security to guarantee that he would come and herald the redemption of his son, of his children, of Yaakov's children. So let me explain this for a second. Eliyahu Hanavi was a zealot, in a good way. Zealot. You could be a zealot for good things, and selfless things, and be a selfless zealot, which Eliyahu Hanavi was. Elijah the prophet was one of those. But unfortunately, there are zealots which they make it, about their ego and about themselves, and they of course mess things up, and they take things way too far, as the zealots did during the time of the Second Temple when they fought with the Romans. So Eliyahu Hanavi was a zealot, and he was a zealot for God. In other words, he wanted the people to serve God and not to worship idols, which is why he did the whole debate on Mount Carmel. And there are many other stories. Eliyahu Hanavi was a purist. He was a righteous purist. And the reason why he went to heaven in a fiery chariot versus being buried is because he had no physical body left to bury. His entire body became so subservient to his soul that there was nothing left but a soul, and the soul ascended to heaven like everyone's soul ascends to heaven. When we pass away, what usually happens is our physical material existence goes back to its source, which is in the earth, and our spiritual part of us goes back to its source, which is to be part of God, and it ascends to heaven. So Eliyahu Hanavi was all 100% soul, which is why he ascended to heaven the way he was. Now, Hashem wasn't happy with him. Hashem wanted him that even though he's trying to help the people, serve God and not idols, Hashem wanted him to defend them. So therefore, Hashem made Eliyahu Hanavi the angel, the guardian angel of the Jewish people, to visit them for every Passover Seder, to prove to Eliyahu that, look, my children, Hashem is saying to Eliyahu, my children are still keeping Passover. They're still keeping the mitzvahs. Even under all the turmoil and all the suffering that they're facing, they're still keeping Passover. Witness it and tell them the arrival of Mashiach is here. The same goes for, it says that Eliyahu Hanavi visits every bris milah, every circumcision, for the same reason, to show Elijah the prophet, who was concerned about them because of their idol worship during the days of the first temple, showing that we're still committed to God and we're still fulfilling the mitzvahs the way we're supposed to. So Eliyahu Hanavi is the purest, and yet Eliyahu, because he is the purest, and because he is the one who is now our guardian, as we have throughout our history, the stories of Elijah the prophet saving the Jewish people many times over. And the righteous throughout these generations have merited to learn face to face with Elijah the prophet. So Elijah is the symbol of, God's angel to protect the Jewish people, as well as to redeem us and to inform us of the redemption. Now Yaakov is the father. Yaakov is our father, is our ancestor. Yaakov wanted to make sure that Elijah the prophet is not going to, ascend to spiritual heights and forget about the people down here. And remember that his children and his descendants are in exile, and therefore they need to be redeemed. Don't forget that. So Yaakov was taking the vav of Eliyahu's name to hold it as a collateral. Do your job and redeem my children. Okay. So the Navi's job is to redeem the people. Now, Passover has a deep connection to the final redemption. As it says, in the month of Nisan, we were redeemed from Egypt, and we will also be redeemed in the future. And we say this in the month of Nisan exclusively. After Nisan, we say that, Mashiach had still come in Iyar in the next month, and he'll explain why he came in Iyar or whatever. The point is that Mashiach could come anytime. However, there's a special feeling during the month of Nisan, which is the month that we're in, that Mashiach could come. It's supposed to come in this month. And especially the night of Passover, because the night of Passover, it says, was designated from the time of creation to be the night of redemption, not just from Egypt, but from the final redemption as well. As it says over here, I think we have the text. This is in the Talmud of Rosh Hashanah, that in the month of Nisan we were redeemed from Egypt, and in Nisan we will be redeemed again. How do we know this? From the verse states regarding Passover, it is a night of anticipation for Hashem. This means that the night has been anticipated since 6 days of creation as the date of the final redemption. So the Talmud is telling us that this night of Pesach is already designated to be the night of redemption. So that being the case, we are automatically welcoming Elijah the prophet to say, is it time? Is it time? Are we here? Is this the end? Is this the final redemption that you're coming to tell us about? There's something even more going on. And what is that? So let's look at text 8, because what text 8 is trying to show us is that there's actually, now this was from somebody who lived in Europe during the very difficult times of pogroms. And here's what he writes. In numerous places, it is customary to leave doors unlocked on Passover Eve. Why? Because in the month of Nisan, we were redeemed from Egypt, and in Nisan, we will be redeemed again. As it says, it is a night of anticipation for Hashem, which means a night that has been anticipated since the 6 days of creation as the date of the final redemption. So if Elijah indeed arrives with the news that Mashiach is here, that the redemption is here, he will find an open door and will be able to go out and greet him quickly. Indeed, we believe that he will arrive. And that this is why this is finalizing this custom that we have that in our regions, he says, to pour an additional cup, we call it Elijah's cup. Now, he was writing this, among the most difficult times where Jewish communities were being wiped out on a random day because of whatever libel came up with, a blood libel, or which was relevant to Passover, or the Jews poisoned the wells, or all the different libels that were happening. Jewish communities were being wiped out by the dozens. And here he's writing that leave your doors unlocked because Elijah the prophet is coming and we want him to find an open door. And we're going to pour a 5th cup to call it Elijah's cup to show how much we believe that he's coming. In other words, we want to show that our faith is not just internal, but we're actually going to act it out and live it and be able to celebrate with Elijah, knowing that he's going to come and tell us the news that Mashiach is here. So the Rebbe asks a very interesting question on all this. And by the way, I just want to point out that there's a halachic commentary that writes that since the Torah tells us we're not allowed to rely on miracles, we're not supposed to rely on miracles. We want miracles, but we're not allowed to rely on them. So therefore, if you live in a place that is dangerous to leave your doors unlocked, you should not rely on a miracle. Yes, God protects us, but it doesn't mean we should be stupid. So in places where you're concerned, you should lock your doors. And that's, it's important to remember that there's symbolism and there's things that we want to do to demonstrate our excitement for Mashiach coming, but there's also protecting your families and not doing something reckless. So the Rebbe asks an interesting question now. It seems like this custom of pouring a cup for Elijah the prophet is in the last 500 years is when it became popular. We don't find it written in the Talmud at all. We have the mention of the 5th cup, but it doesn't mention that's Elijah's cup. We don't find it, it's definitely not an edict that was established from the entire Jewish community. It was more a tradition that popped up in the last 500 years. So then I'm asking a question. We know that, as the generations, evolved, they became less and less spiritual and less connected. during the times of the temple, they were, they had godliness in front of them. Godliness was right in revealed. They had heavenly voices coming from the sky. I mean, they were living on a different plane. In fact, it says here, there's actually we have a text here. There's a text from the sages of the Talmud saying that if the early generations are characterized as sons of angels, we are the sons of men. In other words, that we're low on a lower level. And if the early generations are characterized as sons of men, then we are akin to donkeys. And we're not referring to the extraordinary intelligent donkeys of Rechnina ben Daisa, who are known to be like the spiritual they were able to talk. Or the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, miraculously. Rather, we are akin to regular donkeys. In other words, a sense of humility that we're not nearly as good as their previous generations. But we know this, when we look back at our ancestors and we look back at what they endured, and their faith and their commitment to Hashem and their commitment to Torah and mitzvos, it was obviously a lot greater than ours. So if they're the one, and when I say ancestors, I'm going way back before this custom was established. So if way back when they didn't have this tradition of pouring a fifth cup for Elijah the prophet, in other words, I guess either Mashiach wasn't ready to come, or who are we to think that we're going to be the ones to welcome Mashiach? How is it possible that we are in our lowly spiritual state are going to be the ones that will merit Eliyahu Hanavi actually revealing himself, not just coming in spiritual form, but actually coming in physical form to tell us about the redemption? Why are we, what gives us the right to have that level of confidence that that Elijah the prophet is going to reveal himself to us? Throughout history, I'm a big fan of stories of our sages, and a lot of the great stories. I'm sorry, 1 second. A lot of the great stories involve Elijah the prophet revealing himself or studying with one of the sages and being that angel or that messenger, and it's almost like as a child, I would love to, you want to see Elijah the prophet because you know all the stories and you know everything that went, throughout our history. The story of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, it says that when he first came to Mizrich to study at the Maggid of Mizrich, so it was a packed house, and he was sitting in the back because he was one of the younger students, and a man with a red beard came in, and there was nowhere for him to sit. So the Alter Rebbe, seeing that he's an older gentleman, got up and let this man with the red beard sit down in his place. And the Alter Rebbe stood at the back wall. And the Rebbe told the story, by the way. And at the end of the Maggid's teaching, and everybody left, the Maggid walks over to the Alter Rebbe and says, "Thank you so much for giving your chair to Elijah the prophet." And there's many, many stories, where the great sages had that kind of revelation and connection to see, to merit the visual of Elijah the prophet. So here Rabbi Yochanan says like this. So if that's the case, how much more so for us in terms of the opposite direction? We're obviously not nearly as great as they are. Rabbi Yochanan says the wisdom of the early sages were as wide as the doorway to the entrance of the temple, which was 20 by 40 cubits, which was a very wide opening. The hearts of the later sages were like the doorway of the sanctuary, which was only 10 by 20 cubits. And we are hearts like the eye of a fine needle. In other words, we can't compare ourselves to the ancestors and to those who lived before us, because their hearts and their souls were so much more connected to God than we are. So who are we to think that our Seder, our Passover Seder, is going to merit the revelation of Elijah the prophet, that we invented this custom of pouring a cup for Elijah? So the Rebbe has a beautiful answer to this. I'm going to skip this text here. It's more about what we call the Unitas Haderis, the descent of the generations. But I want to focus on what the Rebbe is going to say over here. Sorry, it's not the Rebbe, but this is Rabbi Tzadok from Lublin, but he's talking about his Rebbe, and the Rebbe uses this as a way to answer the question. So despite the fact that we are living in a final era before the coming of Mashiach and the souls diminish in every passing generation, our hearts should not falter. Consider what happened to our ancestors during their exile. It was specifically during exile that they attained all the greatest levels of holiness, for such is the divine will. And he writes, I heard in the name of my Rebbe, Simcha Bunim of Peshicha, of blessed memory, that although the souls diminish in greatness with each passing generation, nevertheless, the inner core of the heart becomes progressively pure. In other words, sometimes knowing too much prevents you from having a pure soul, or being connected, or having seeing the miracles and godly revelation prevents you from that pure belief that we have. And this is what the Rebbe jumps on to say, that in our generation, we actually have this even more than our ancestors. So he starts with the question: how can we say that our generation is so deeply related to the redemption? Didn't our sages teach in the early generations we're like angels, we are like humans? Is our generation the most worthy? How are we going to be the ones to merit the redemption? Furthermore, how can one claim that a single action alone can trigger the future redemption, like pouring a cup for Elijah? Seemingly tipping the scale by a minuscule difference shouldn't be able to affect such change and complete and true redemption. So that Rebbe gives an example, a metaphor, that we can answer this question based on the parable given in Jewish ethical works about a dwarf standing on a giant's shoulders. Although the dwarf is small, by standing on the giant's shoulders, they are able to see farther than the giant. Because even though the short person is usually short and not able to see far, but on the giant's shoulders, he has the tremendous advantage to be able to see even greater than the giant can see. So we are all here. The Rebbe continues. This applies to our generation. The earlier generations are comparable to giants, and the earlier ones are like angels. Our generation, on the other hand, is compared to the dwarf, but we're standing on the giant's shoulders. We're adding to what they already built. So since all of our generations worked the dwarf, built upon the labor of the early generations, on the shoulders of the giant, it is specifically the effort of our generation that can bring about the future redemption. As our sages have stated, the task is attributed only to the one who completes it. So even though we didn't start this, even though we don't have all the merits that they did, but because we're the ones at the finish line, we get to stand on their shoulders and be able to finish the job. And that's why we're the ones who invented the cup of Elijah, because we're the ones who are going to get across the finish line. We're not thinking that it's us alone. We know it's all their work. We know we're standing on their shoulders. But at the same time, we're going to take advantage of this and see further than they were able to see by ushering in the final redemption. So let us recap quickly. We have one more text, but let's recap quickly what this fifth cup represents. There's a debate in the Talmud that tells us there's a fifth cup, although we can't drink more than 4 cups of wine. Why? Because there's a fifth term of redemption called Vehevesi, and I'll bring you to the land of Israel. And the term Vehevesi is not necessarily fulfilled. Even if we're living in the land of Israel, we're not actually experiencing the land of Israel the way it was meant to be. So that promise hasn't been fully fulfilled. So we don't want to drink a fifth cup for that yet. However, we're going to pour it. We'll pour the fifth cup because we are so excited and so full of faith that it's about to happen that we're actually not even going to have to pour it back in the bottle of wine, because Eliyahu is going to come and reveal himself and tell us the Mashiach is here. And that pure faith is something that only we could have. That pure faith is what we, without all the spiritual knowledge and miracles and Kabbalistic teachings and all the deep study, it's the pure faith that we have that has that ability to do that. So we shouldn't be embarrassed when we open the door for Elijah. We shouldn't be, feel like we're disillusioned, but realize that we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors when we open the door for Elijah. And by doing that, we actually might just be the ones to welcome Elijah the prophet and announce the coming of Mashiach. Now, there's one more text, and then I want to answer the question about the role of Eliyahu and the role of Mashiach. So the belief in Mashiach's coming is present in every Jew. As all Jews are believers, the children of believers. Regardless of the level of divine service we have attained with our conscious self, we constantly possess openly, or at least in the inner depths of our soul, faith in the coming of Mashiach. And not only faith that he will eventually come, but also actual anticipation of his arrival. We all possess the faith because this is a divine commandment stated in both the written Torah and the oral Torah. Moreover, the closer we find ourselves to the time of Mashiach, the stronger and brighter this faith grows among the Jewish people. This is why it's specifically in the later generations that the custom of pouring an additional cup called the cup of Elijah the prophet has been revealed and spread, because we have that pure heart that we know we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, but we're actually paving the way for the redemption. So, what is the role of Eliyahu HaNavi, and what is the role of Mashiach? So there's two things that have to happen. Mashiach, the idea of Mashiach coming and restoring the Davidic dynasty and building the Beis Hamikdash is a new era. Is an era of pure knowledge of God spreading all over the world, like the ocean covers the ocean bed, the resurrection of the dead, and basically completely about the future and about living in basking in the glow of godliness. Eliyahu Hanavi, on the other hand, is someone who witnessed and was made to witness the suffering of the Jewish people throughout our history, both in the good times and in the bad, through the first temple, through the second temple. And that's why I mentioned earlier the stories of Elijah the prophet always being the one that was considered the guardian of the Jewish people, because he would always show up when the Jewish people needed them. And he was the one that would connect with the righteous of every generation to do his job and ensure that that the Jewish people are taken care of. So by him announcing the end of the exile, what he's doing is he's wrapping up, or he's elevating all that pain and suffering and all that challenge, all the challenges that we faced, and all the things that to us was seemed like there's no end in sight. And he's elevating that and turning that over for us so we could see how it was all leading to this very moment. And that's when we could start the new era with Mashiach himself, and be able to start, living this new life that Hashem has envisioned for us. So Elijah the prophet is sort of joining in with us in our suffering, to able to transform that into happiness. Like we say, the days of pain will be turned into the happiest days. So it's on Pesach, when that is the day designated for the redemption, Eliyahu Hanavi is the one who's going to come and tell us and remind us and elevate us and say, now Mashiach is here, and all the experiences that we had in the past are over, and it's time to usher in this new era of Mashiach. And that's why the promise is, Hini anechi shaleach Eliyahu Hanavi. I'm sending Eliyahu Hanavi, who's going to tell you about the day that Hashem comes. In other words, he's coming to tell you it's over. Anavim Igi is going to say, to the Jewish people, don't worry, Mashiach is here. All of this was just part of the plan, and now we are finally here at this moment with the final redemption. So let us hope that we will actually be able to greet Eliyahu Hanavi this Pesach and have him tell us that Mashiach is here and put an end to this bitter exile. Shabbat Shalom, and a happy and kosher and healthy Pesach to everyone. Thank you so much for joining and being a part of this.
Thank you, and the same good wishes to you.